Jai Bhagwan, and good morning. All right, looks like we're all set to go. Let's begin by chanting here. Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. If the eyes are open, let them close. And bring all of the attention up to the third eye, the center of the eyebrows toward the center of the forehead. Inhale and begin to feel the hands moving through the air toward prayer position. Feel the moment the palms touch. As you exhale, let the eyes open. Again, Jai Bhagwan, and welcome. So, yesterday, I read a bit from the Yoga Sutras, and I had a little book called Enlightened Living, and it's a new interpretive translation of the Yoga Sutras by Swami Venkatasananda. And if you have a little hard time, little difficulty saying Venkatasananda, call him Swami V. And I first encountered this translation of the Yoga Sutras in 2010. And a dear friend of mine, Chandrakant, he plays, you might have heard of him before if you've listened, if you've been here at Bhakti House, you've heard of him before. If you've been listening to these broadcasts for any amount of time, you've heard of him before. The only reason, make sure that we can see Bapaji over there, over my right shoulder. Don't want to obscure the guru. Technically, Chandrakant and I would be considered guru brothers. Personally, I consider him a dear friend, a mentor, one of those that I would call a guru in my life, someone who has helped lead me from darkness to light. And anyway, if I get started on Chandrakant, we won't talk about anything else, so I'll stop. And I've read through that little red book a couple of times, and there's a free PDF of it on Swami V's website, and there's a link in yesterday's, the comments of yesterday's broadcast. When I read the first sutra of the Yoga Sutras, Atta Yoga Nusasanam, Atta Yoga Nusasanam Yogash-chitta vritti nirodha. When I read that first sutra, Atta Yoga Nusasanam, typically I focus on the first word, Atta, which means now. The real translation, or the basic translation, is now is the exposition of yoga. And that gets translated as now begins the exposition of yoga, now begins the communication of yoga, now I will teach you yoga. And I typically focus on the word now, largely because that's what the focus has been. And now, that word now is important. A lot of people say, well, that means there's been a lot of preparation beforehand, and that may or may not be true. What it really means is now teaches you everything about yoga. Now is the exposition of yoga. It's not that now the exposition of yoga is beginning. Now, this moment now, by itself, is the exposition of yoga. If you can cultivate the ability to be fully present and focused now, that is yoga. The other things will begin to follow naturally. But most of us aren't quite capable of doing that, so there's a lot of other information on how to do this. But as I read Swami Venkatasananda's translation yesterday, I realized that there was more that could be, that there was things we should probably talk about today rather than continuing on with the sutras. And you can read that here on the right-hand side. Now, when a sincere seeker approaches an enlightened teacher with the right attitude of discipleship, for example, free of preconceived notions and prejudices, full of intelligent faith and receptivity, and with the right spirit of inquiry, at the right time and place, communication of yoga takes place. And I've taught a large number of people over the years. I've been with Gurudev, Yogi Amrit Desai, for I don't know how many hours now, and watched seekers of different quality approach him and ask him questions and live there at the ashram with him and study with him. And by different qualities, I don't mean whether they're good people or bad people. Throughout all of the yogic scriptures, I'm just looking quickly to see if I have one that I can use, but I don't see one. Seekers are categorized into 3, sometimes 4 groups. And those 3 groups, the 3 groups that are most commonly used, are known as the gunas. And the gunas are the qualities of nature. Tamas, which is inertia. Things tend to remain at rest that are at rest. Things in motion tend to remain in motion. And rajas, which is activity, and sattva, which is a steadiness that sometimes looks like tamas. And the tamasic seeker is someone who kind of has to be forced into it. And most of us, we start here. There's a bit of pain, there's a bit of suffering that we would like to be rid of. And so it kind of pokes us. But then we don't have a lot of oomph to keep going. And so we kind of need somebody to kick us in the butt and get us moving. And sometimes, that's if you're in ashram, sometimes that's the sadhana police, the people who check to make sure that you've got a check mark on every morning for morning sadhana, for morning yoga practice. And sometimes it's, if you don't do all of these things, you're out. That's kind of a harsh way to encourage sadhana, to encourage self-investigation through yoga practice. Then there's the Rajasic folks, and Rajasic folks, they've kind of got the idea, this is good, it's good for me. They kind of approach yoga the way that a bachelor might approach cooking a cake. If it takes an hour at 350 degrees, it'll only take 30 minutes at 700 degrees. no, let's see if we can't get this thing done in an even shorter amount of time. Let's crank it up even more. And sometimes they burn out. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because then they start to realize, oh, my enthusiasm's not a bad thing, but maybe I need to remember to take a breath. And sattvic, they have a lot of zeal, they have a lot of intensity for what's happening. But they're also steady, like the tamasic, who just kind of coasts along. But the sattvic folks are not coasting along. They're still really wanting what's available. But they start to move more from it's a chore, that's the tamasic, to it's a passion, that's the rajasic, to it's a devotion. And that's really more the sattvic approach. So I thought it would be beneficial to kind of look over this interpretation that Swami Venkatasananda gave of those three simple words, Atta Yoga Nusasanam. Now is the exposition of yoga. So what is a sincere seeker? Let's not bother with the enlightened teacher portion. Consider this any teacher that you are approaching. You are not concerned, don't be so concerned as whether or not the teacher you're approaching is enlightened. That's not on your shoulders. The only thing on your shoulders is what kind of seeker are you? A sincere seeker, what does that mean? One with the right attitude of discipleship. And I know we're a very Christian culture here where I live. I grew up very much in this culture. And so that word disciple sometimes makes people a little bit twitchy when it's applied to anything other than Christianity. It simply means that you as an individual are taking on some sort of discipline. And not discipline like somebody's racking your knuckles with a ruler, but rather that you're using something to you're using something to train and strengthen something within yourself. You're using some system to train and strengthen something within yourself. Discipleship, discipline. So, what is this right attitude of discipleship? Free of preconceived notions and prejudices. You cannot go to any teacher and say, teach me, and then give them a full cup. Because you can't pour more into a full cup. And that doesn't mean that you have to forget everything that you've already learned. It doesn't mean you have to ignore the past. But let it start to soften up. And recognize that the reason you've come to this teacher, whomever they are, in the first place is because you've recognized they have something to offer you that you haven't been able to find for yourself so far along the way, or that maybe isn't quite as clear for you as it needs to be. Full of intelligent faith, what does that mean? Well, intelligent, first off, you've got to be willing to put some effort, some thought, some reasoning into whatever it is that you're learning, whatever it is you're studying, whatever it is that your teacher is communicating to you. It would be wonderful if our teachers could simply hand us on a platter everything that they've ever experienced and learned, and that we could then immediately benefit from all of that wisdom and understanding and experience that they have. It's not the way it works, though. And that would really, at very best, kind of make us clones of someone else, and that's not the teacher's purpose. The teacher's purpose is not to turn you into a clone of themselves. And if your teacher is, if you find yourself kind of being guided in that direction, you might want to look for a new teacher. Receptivity. Receptivity. It is guaranteed that your teacher, it doesn't matter what the discipline is, it doesn't matter if it's yoga or mathematics or gardening, whatever. Your teacher is going to present you with concepts and ideas that are going to be exceptionally challenging to you, especially in yoga. Because one of the first things that you're going to learn, especially from someone who is actually an enlightened teacher, that person is going to challenge your belief of who you are. And you have spent your entire life creating that belief of who you are. That's going to be challenging. When without that receptivity, you're just going to shut it right off. And I've watched that happen again and again and again, where this personality is so strong and so rigid that there's no opportunity for that individual to really do any kind of self-inquiry. Who am I really? Babaji said, and Gurudev says, Babaji said the first experience of meditation is, I am not the body. And most of us think we are the body. Gurudev said the only problem you have is that you don't know who you are. Well, right there, that's a little bit challenging. Well, if I don't know who I am, who am I? We've got to be a little receptive. We have to, and that's why all of these things need to be a little soft. But it's this next piece that really is the most important, with the right spirit of inquiry. You should question everything your teacher teaches you. But that doesn't mean you should inquire into everything your teacher teaches you. You should investigate everything your teacher teaches you. And so when I say you should question, I don't mean you should doubt. I don't mean you should try to prove wrong. I don't mean you should try to find fault. I mean you should go, I wonder how that works. Can I understand how to get from point A, which is where I am now, and how I see the world, to point B, something that was just communicated to me? And hopefully you have the kind of teacher that gives you some steps, that doesn't require you to just have blind faith, but rather this intelligent faith, where I see step by step. And the faith isn't in some sort of magic black box, but the faith is in, my teacher says, start with this step, and then this step. And I now get why this step is next. And I imagine this might be the next step, and sure enough, there's the next step. To where you're naturally following a progression step by step, from simply standing on a yoga mat and touching your toes, to understanding step by step how standing around in funny little postures on a yoga mat leads to liberation. And for those of you in the teacher apprenticeship program who may be watching, you may have just heard a clue as to where the program is moving to next. Being able to understand and communicate how does standing around in these funny little shapes, step by step, lead us to liberation without requiring blind faith or belief in magic? Inquiry is the only way you can begin to understand that. We have to inquire, how does this work? We have to investigate it. That's why we get on these cushions and on yoga mats. I'm pointing over here. You can't see it, I can tell, but my yoga mat sitting right here from earlier sadhana. You can't just hear these things. And so what's the point for this morning's satsang? And I have a question for you here to follow up. Investigate for yourself. Are you a sincere seeker? And don't just say, yes, I am. But start to look at your own attitude of discipleship. Are your preconceived prejudices and notions kind of rigid? Do you require that the things you hear fit into the boxes you've already created? Do you reject things that challenge? Things that you may even hold exceptionally dear and may be in your personal life very sacred to you? Because here's the secret. For those of you who find some of these things may challenge those very sacred things in your life, if you allow yourself to open those sacred things up and begin to view them through different lenses, you'll find there's much more to those sacred things in your life. You will not find that what you have is taken away, but rather is you are able to see it more clearly and to embrace what you've already received even more fully. Or at least that has been my own experience. But take a look at this. This is a checklist. But incorrect. This is not a checklist. And don't try to embody all of these things at once. Pick one. Pick something that's obvious to you. I'm having a little difficulty maybe with the intelligent faith. Because faith requires us to put trust in someone, and maybe we haven't really had a lot of successful experience with trust. Maybe we've been hurt quite a bit. And that affects our receptivity. And if we're not receptive, then our preconceived notions and prejudices will be more rigid. And without those things, then our spirit of inquiry is going to be more, how can I prove this person wrong so that I have an increased self-worth? In the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about finding a teacher and throwing yourself, prostrating in front of them. And I don't have a copy of the Gita here that I can read you that. And that can be literal, as I said yesterday, I believe, literal or metaphorical. The point of prostrating at the feet of your teacher is not that your teacher needs you to be on the floor in front of them. It has nothing to do with that. But it is for yourself, that attitude of humility, that attitude of please teach me, teach me, teach me, teach me, teach me, and the attitude of trust. I trust you're going to teach me something helpful and beneficial. Now, it's not hard to look in the news and find multiple examples of real and imagined betrayal by teachers to their students. And I say imagined because sometimes the betrayal is because we've set this person up on such a high pedestal. And there's a reason why I prefer to sit on the floor on a cushion and not even up here on the mantle if I can avoid it. on the hearth here, so if I can avoid it. Because there's not very far to fall off of a cushion. People put their teachers on such a high pedestal that those moments when they discover, whether the moments are big or the moments are small sometimes even, that these teachers on a pedestal are still human, the pedestal comes crashing down. And if the teacher believes in the pedestal, the crash is even harder. And then everybody gets injured. Sometimes the teacher is smart and is staying on a cushion. There may still be a crash for the teacher, but it's not as injurious to everyone else. And there may be a crash for that student, but again, it doesn't injure a whole host of people around them. So how do you prevent these kinds of injuries? One, don't put your teacher on a pedestal. Love them. Be devoted to them. Sit on the couch next to them. That's enough. And how do you keep, though, from, because there are also those teachers who have used their position to manipulate people for their own benefit, not for the other's benefit. That's not a nice way to teach people necessarily, but sometimes it's necessary. But manipulating others for the benefit of the teacher is an abuse. It doesn't matter what the manipulation is. If you begin to recognize that that is happening, and how do you recognize that? Are your fellow students? How about yourself? Do you show up the same when you're in the presence of your teacher as when you're not in the presence of your teacher? Does what you're experiencing in the presence of your teacher begin to inform and uplift the time that you're not with them? That's what you're looking for, right? But if the only time you really get that uplift, if the only time you is when you're with them, it's time to investigate that relationship. It could be that you've fallen into the groupie mode and you're pinning all of the benefit of your life on this one person, which is not helpful to you. And it could be also that the teacher is encouraging that, and that's not helpful for them or you. So be intelligent with your faith. Don't go into it fearful. But use that very simple. Am I, as I'm in the presence of this teacher, this guru, and feeling uplifted, am I also feeling that way when I'm not in their presence? Maybe not as intensely, but is it having an effect? And is that effect then easily shared with others? All right, I thought I might gone a bit over time this morning. Thank you for those of you who have hung on a bit. And this brings up a question. And if you'll just, I'll put a link to a post with a poll where you can let me know your thoughts so I can keep this all in one place. Originally, this started off as a 30-minute sadhana, and I would do 30 minutes of postures or of japa or of chanting or of meditation, and it evolved into sadhana and satsang. I would try to do 15 minutes of each, and obviously that has worked out exceptionally well as it's evolved into now we're at 35 minutes of sadhana. or of satsang, as we've talked about this just one sutra. What is most beneficial to you at home? Let me know. And would you prefer to see maybe one day a 30 minutes of satsang and one day 30 minutes of sadhana? I mean, we could do that. That actually might not be a bad idea. Or would you prefer to see, just let me know. And like I say, I'll post a link in the comments. And you can go ahead and let me know that using that link. And I'm open. I'm not sitting here in the mornings so that I can make sure that my hair looks good. I want to share this with as many people as possible. I know through the day, from the comments that I receive behind the scenes and from some of the comments you folks that leave on the broadcasts themselves, that this is reaching people literally around the world. And I can't do that without, well, at this point, Facebook, and without sitting here in front of you every morning. So let me know how we can together make the most out of this time. Anyway, enough of that. Well, let's just take another 4 minutes together, shall we? And we will just let the eyes close. And as we did yesterday, we will chant a continuous sound of Om together. And as was suggested by Patanjali as I read through yesterday, meditate upon the meaning of Om. Om represents everything. Patanjali said that Om alludes to the omniscient, indwelling one, Ishvara, and that would be the true self. So if Om represents everything, and Om points toward the true self is everything. And just contemplate that gently as we chant. And now just the sound of And as the sound fades away into silence, let the eyes close if they've come open. And just rest for a moment in this silence. Yes, it is helpful to find an enlightened teacher. And we'll look at that a little bit tomorrow. But more important than finding an enlightened teacher is being a sincere seeker. Investigate yourself. Are you that sincere seeker who has the right attitude of discipleship, being free of preconceived notions and prejudices, full of intelligent faith and receptivity, and with the right spirit of inquiry? Bring the hands up toward prayer position. As you exhale, let the eyes open. Jai Bhagwan. And again, thank you for being here this morning. Or whenever you are watching, thank you for being here now. And until we have a chance to see each other or to enjoy some time together, whether here in person or here online, Jai Bhagwan.